The chain-link fence surrounding the state penitentiary sagged under the weight of overgrown vines, nature slowly reclaiming what man had abandoned. I adjusted my backpack and studied the massive structure silhouetted against the darkening autumn sky. The prison's concrete walls stood tall ahead. "You sure about this, Alex?" Kyle asked, his voice barely above a whisper even though we were a half-mile from the nearest neighbor. "We've done this place 3 times already," I reminded him, shining my flashlight along the perimeter. "Just never made it to the isolation wing." Sarah stepped beside me. "The light's perfect right now. That golden hour glow coming through the broken windows will make for amazing shots. If we don't get tetanus first," Kevin added with a nervous laugh. He was always like this at the beginning of explorations, anxious energy masked with humor. I ducked through the gap in the fence we discovered during our first visit last spring. The others followed, our boots crunching on the gravel path hidden beneath fallen leaves. 27 years of abandonment had transformed the prison grounds into a strange mix of institutional decay and wild growth. "Stay together until we reach the main building," I said, leading them along our usual path that avoided the open yard with its spotlights, non-functional for decades but still somehow intimidating. Sarah consulted her phone, reviewing the drone footage she'd captured last week. "Northeast corner is where we need to go, administration building first, then through to the restricted section." The cool evening air carried the musty scent of decaying wood and concrete. I'd researched Blackwater extensively before our first visit. Closed suddenly in 1996 after budget cuts and structural concerns, according to official records. The real story, according to local forums and former employees we'd interviewed, involved unexplained incidents in the isolation wing and staff refusing to work there. We reached the administration building, its windows long since shattered by vandals or storms. I found our usual entry point, a first-floor window with the frame mostly intact but the glass missing. "I'll go first," I said, switching on my headlamp before climbing through. The well-known smell of mold and dust filled my nostrils as I landed on the cracked linoleum floor. I swept my light across the room. Once an office, now stripped of anything valuable, walls covered in crude graffiti. I'd seen it all before, but something about knowing we were heading to the isolation wing today made the atmosphere feel different. "All clear," I called back, helping Sarah through the window. Kyle came next, followed by Kevin, who predictably stumbled on the landing and cursed under his breath. "You good?" I asked. "Yeah, just twisted my ankle a little. I'm fine." Kevin tapped his foot on the ground as if proving it to himself. Sarah's camera clicked rapidly as she captured the entrance area. "Let's try not to disturb anything more than necessary. I want to document how it looks naturally." We moved through the corridors with practiced efficiency, passing through the main administrative offices where scattered papers and overturned furniture made the place look abandoned in a hurry. I'd always found it strange how people left in such a hurry that personal items remained. Framed photos, coffee mugs, even jackets still hanging on office chairs. "Main cell block ahead," I announced, pushing open a heavy metal door that groaned in protest. The vast space opened before us, 3 tiers of cells stretching in both directions, light filtering through skylights far above. Unlike the offices, the cell block was unusually quiet. Rusted bed frames still bolted to walls, toilets, and occasional personal effects left behind by former inmates filled the space. "I swear this place feels colder every time we visit," Sarah said, her breath visible in the beam of her flashlight. Kyle nodded. "Temperatures dropped about 7 degrees since we entered the building." Kevin slapped Kyle's shoulder. "That's because it's getting dark, man. Basic science." "No, it's dropping faster than it should," Kyle insisted. "Doesn't feel natural." I'd learned to trust Kyle's observations. He had an uncanny sensitivity to environments that had proven useful on previous explorations. "Let's keep moving," I said, heading toward the northeast corridor. "We've documented this section thoroughly already. I want at least 2 hours in the isolation wing before we lose daylight completely." Sarah unfolded our hand-drawn map, comparing it to the official blueprint we'd found online. We need to go through the cafeteria, past medical, then through the administrative corridors. The isolation wing should be at the end of that hallway. The cafeteria was a massive room with long tables bolted to the floor and metal chairs scattered throughout. The serving area retained its industrial equipment, massive steel cooking pots and utensils designed to feed hundreds of men daily. "Check this out," Kevin called, pointing to a wall calendar frozen on October 1996, the month the prison closed. Taco Tuesday. Bet they were disappointed to miss that. Sarah photographed the calendar while I moved ahead, eager to reach our destination. We'd spent months planning this visit, coordinating our schedules and gathering equipment. The isolation wing represented the final unexplored section of Blackwater, a place even other urban explorers rarely ventured. The medical wing came next, its examination rooms and medicine cabinets long since looted of anything valuable. An old X-ray viewing box hung crooked on one wall, its plastic screen cracked but still in place. "Remember what that former guard told us?" I asked as we moved through the space. How they kept having to replace staff assigned to the isolation wing. Kyle nodded. Said they'd request transfers within days. Claimed the place made them hear things. Or see things, Sarah added, her camera clicking steadily. Though he might have been exaggerating to make a better story. People love to feed urban legends, I agreed, though I'd learned to hold space for others' beliefs, even if I didn't share them. But there's usually some kernel of truth behind most of them. We continued through corridors that grew narrower as we approached the administrative section connected to the isolation wing. The walls here were different, concrete rather than painted drywall, with fewer windows and more security features. As we turned the final corner before the administrative corridors, a strange sensation washed over me, pressure building in my ears like descending rapidly in an airplane. I swallowed hard, trying to clear it. "You guys feel that?" I asked, touching my ear. "Feel what?" Kevin looked confused. Sarah shook her head, but Kyle's expression changed. "Like pressure?" "Yeah, I felt it too." The corridor ahead stretched about 50 yards, ending at a set of double doors with faded lettering. Even from this distance, I could make out the words, "Authorized personnel only," and beneath it, "Isolation wing." "Let's take 5, I suggested, pointing to a small break room on our left. "Hydrate and review the plan before we head in." We filed into the break room where a dusty coffee maker still sat on a counter, its cord dangling uselessly with no electricity to power it. I unslung my backpack and pulled out water bottles, passing them around as we gathered around a table covered in a fine layer of dust. "So, what's the plan once we're inside?" Kevin asked, taking a long drink. I spread out our map, indicating the isolation wing's layout based on partial blueprints we'd found. We stay together, document everything methodically. Sarah focuses on photography, Kyle on environmental readings, Kevin on video. I'll coordinate and take notes. "I heard they kept the worst offenders there," Kyle said quietly. "Violent inmates who couldn't be housed with general population. And supposedly some who claimed to be possessed," Sarah added, her voice neutral but eyes betraying her fascination with the supernatural elements of our explorations. "Well, the only thing possessing that place now is mold and rats," I said with a confidence I mostly felt. "We've explored dozens of places with ghost stories attached to them, never found anything that couldn't be explained by natural causes." Kevin nodded enthusiastically. "Remember that haunted hospital in Pittsburgh? Turned out the weird noises were just pipes expanding." "This place feels different, though," Kyle insisted, looking toward the hallway. "Like something's waiting for us." I noticed Sarah shiver slightly, though she tried to hide it by adjusting her camera. "Every location has its own energy," I conceded, gathering my gear. "That's what makes this interesting. But we stick to the plan, stay together, and document everything objectively." As we prepared to continue, I checked our supplies one last time. Extra batteries, first aid kit, protein bars, backup flashlights, all accounted for. We'd explored countless abandoned buildings together over the years, from hospitals to factories and schools. Blackwater was just another location to document, another piece of forgotten history to preserve through our cameras and notes. At least, that's what I told myself as we stood and headed toward the double doors. The pressure in my ears returned stronger than before, and a subtle vibration seemed to come from somewhere beyond the isolation wing entrance. Probably just the wind moving through broken windows, I reasoned, feeling increasingly uneasy. "Everyone ready?" I asked, my hand on the door. The heavy door refused to budge under my hand. I pushed harder, my confidence faltering as it became clear something was wrong. "It's locked," I said, stepping back to examine the massive steel barrier that separated us from the isolation wing. Sarah looked puzzled. "That doesn't make sense. The decommissioning report said all internal locks were disabled in '96. "Let me try," Kevin offered, throwing his shoulder against the door. The impact reverberated through the corridor but produced no movement. We spent the next 2 hours combing through the administrative sections adjacent to the isolation wing, gathering whatever information we could find. The prison's records lay scattered across offices and storage rooms, left behind in what appeared to be a hasty evacuation. I flipped through a stack of inmate complaint forms in what had once been the prison administrator's office. The yellowed papers documented increasingly bizarre incidents. "Listen to this," I called to the others. "Inmate 4532 requests transfer from cell block D after reporting voices emanating from air vents connected to isolation wing. Request denied." Sarah looked up from her own pile of documents. "There are dozens of similar reports here." She aimed her camera at an incident report, the flash momentarily brightening the dim room. This one describes a mass psychosis event in March 1996. 3 guards and 4 inmates experienced identical hallucinations simultaneously. "That could be explained by carbon monoxide poisoning," I suggested, though something about the clinical language of the report felt deliberately evasive. Kyle entered from an adjacent office, his face pale in the beam of his headlamp. "I found maintenance logs for the entire facility. The isolation wing consumed 3 times more electricity than any other section, even though it housed fewer inmates. The chief engineer flagged it multiple times, but his concerns were dismissed by administration." "Why would a smaller section need more power?" Kevin asked, looking up from a filing cabinet he'd been searching. "They claimed additional security measures," Kyle replied, "but the specs don't match any standard prison systems I've ever heard of." We continued our search as the afternoon progressed. The prison felt different since we arrived. The silence seemed deeper and more intense. Kevin's excited voice broke through my thoughts. "Holy shit, guys. Come look at this." We gathered around a large architectural blueprint he'd unrolled across a dusty desk. The paper was marked with red, classified stamps. "These are renovation plans for the isolation wing," Kevin explained, pointing to dates in the corner. "Dated just 4 months before the prison shut down. Look at the structural changes. Reinforced walls, specialized wiring, and some kind of containment system. That's not standard for any prison I know of." Sarah photographed the blueprints while I studied the details. The renovations appeared extensive and technically sophisticated. Whatever purpose they served went far beyond housing difficult inmates. "This doesn't make sense," I muttered. "Why pour resources into renovations right before closure?" We spent another hour attempting to force the isolation wing door, using every tool in our exploration kit. The lock mechanism refused to give. "It's almost like it's locked from the inside," Kyle said, examining the door frame. "But that's impossible unless someone's in there," Sarah finished his thought. We all fell silent, considering the implications. The prison had been abandoned for 27 years. The idea of someone living in the isolation wing all this time seemed absurd, yet the locked door defied explanation. "We should split up," I finally suggested, checking my watch. "We've got about 2 hours of decent light left." Kevin nodded. "What's the plan?" "What's the—" Sarah and Kevin, check the warden's office for keys or lock overrides. Kyle, survey the exterior walls of the isolation wing. Look for structural weaknesses, broken windows, damaged walls, and anything we could use as an entry point. I'll check the maintenance tunnels we found last time. They might lead under the isolation wing. 2 hours, Sarah said. If none of us finds a way in, we meet back at the main entrance and try again another day with better equipment. We marked the time, 5:17 p.m., and synchronized our watches. Splitting up wasn't ideal, but we'd explored enough of Blackwater together to feel confident in our individual abilities. Sarah pulled me aside as Kyle and Kevin gathered their gear. "Be careful in those tunnels," she said. "The structural integrity down there didn't look great last time." "I'll be fine," I assured her, though I shared her concern. The maintenance tunnels had shown significant water damage during our previous visit. 2 hours, she repeated. Not a minute longer. I kissed her goodbye in the cold, decaying prison. "See you soon," I promised. The maintenance access hatch was located in the basement level, near the old boiler room. I descended the rusted ladder carefully, wincing at each metallic groan. My flashlight illuminated the narrow concrete tunnel stretching ahead. The damp air smelled of moisture and decay with the musty scent of long abandoned spaces. Water dripped somewhere in the distance, each drop bouncing along the concrete passage. I consulted the hand-drawn map from our previous exploration, orienting myself toward where the isolation wing should be located. 10 minutes into the tunnels, my flashlight beam caught something that made me freeze. Footprints marked the thick dust covering the floor. Not our footprints from months ago, but fresh ones. The distinct tread pattern led deeper into the tunnel system, heading directly toward the area beneath the isolation wing. I crouched to examine them more closely. The prints were clear and undisturbed, made within the last day or two at most. I felt suddenly cold in a way that had nothing to do with the tunnel's temperature. We weren't alone in Blackwater. Against my better judgment, I began following the footprints, moving deeper into the maintenance tunnels than we'd ever explored before. The footprints continued deeper into the tunnel system, each one perfectly preserved in the undisturbed dust. I followed them carefully, marking my path with chalk arrows on the walls every few yards. The maintenance tunnels narrowed as I progressed, forcing me to duck beneath hanging pipes and step over crumbling concrete debris. 30 minutes had passed since I'd separated from the others. The rational part of my brain urged me to turn back, to rejoin Sarah and the team at our meeting point. But I needed to understand what these footprints meant. Someone had been down here recently. Someone who might hold the key to accessing the isolation wing. My headlamp light moved across the curved tunnel walls and showed something that didn't belong. Behind a row of rusted storage shelves, barely visible unless you were looking for it, was the outline of a door. "What the hell?" I muttered, moving closer. The metal shelves had been subtly positioned to conceal the entrance, but whoever had passed through recently hadn't returned them to their exact original position. I squeezed behind them, running my gloved hand along the door's surface. Unlike everything else in the tunnels, its hinges weren't caked with rust. They shined with fresh oil. The dust around the frame had been disturbed, confirming my suspicion that someone had used this entrance very recently. I pressed my ear against the cold metal and heard a faint mechanical noise from the other side. I felt sudden excitement. The prison had been without power for nearly 3 decades. I gripped the handle and pushed. The door opened with surprising ease, releasing a rush of cool, dry air that smelled nothing like the dank tunnels behind me. "Holy shit," I whispered, stepping through the doorway. I'd entered a massive concrete chamber that existed on none of the prison blueprints we'd studied. The ceiling stretched at least 20 feet high, supported by thick columns. The room buzzed with activity, actual functional machinery that appeared to be fully operational. My flashlight showed what looked like industrial furnaces, but with configurations unlike any I'd seen before. They had the bulk and cast iron construction of equipment from the 1960s, yet incorporated elements that seemed impossibly advanced. Copper pipes ran from these machines throughout the room, each inscribed with intricate symbols that resembled no language I recognized. Most disturbing was the quiet sound of power running. Everything was working, even though the prison's electrical system had been decommissioned decades ago. I pulled out my radio. "Sarah, come in. You're not going to believe what I found." Only static answered. "Kyle? Kevin? Anyone reading me?" Nothing but electronic noise. The concrete walls must have been too thick for the signal to penetrate. In the center of the chamber stood what could only be described as an elevator, but not the institutional steel box you'd expect in a prison. This was an elaborate brass construction with ornate doors and an intricate control panel that glowed with soft amber light. The panel displayed floor options that made no logical sense for Blackwater's three-story structure, B1 through B17, and a single button marked IW, Isolation Wing. I checked my watch. I still had 45 minutes before I needed to meet the others. The elevator potentially offered direct access to our objective, the mysterious section that had eluded us all day. But using it meant venturing further alone without telling the team where I'd gone. "I should go back," I said to the empty room, my voice bouncing off the concrete walls. The responsible choice was clear. Return to the meeting point, bring everyone here, and explore this impossible chamber together. Sarah would be worried if I didn't show up on time. Kyle would want to take readings of the machinery. Kevin would document everything on video. But what if the elevator only worked now because whoever had passed through recently had activated it? What if this opportunity disappeared by the time I returned with the others? I stared at the glowing IW button, remembering all our preparation and all our failed attempts to access the isolation wing. The rational choice fought against my overwhelming curiosity. Curiosity won. Just a quick look, I promised myself. 10 minutes to confirm it leads to the isolation wing, then back to meet the others. I approached the elevator and pressed the call button. The brass doors slid open with surprising smoothness, revealing an interior that contrasted sharply with the surrounding decay. The elevator car was immaculate. Polished wood panels, brass fixtures, and softly glowing lights recessed into the ceiling. No dust, no damage, not even scuff marks on the floor. It looked freshly installed. I hesitated at the threshold, experiencing a moment of instinctive dread that I couldn't explain. Something about the elevator felt wrong, not just out of place, but fundamentally wrong, as if it didn't belong in our reality. I shook off the feeling. After years of urban exploration, I'd learned to distinguish between genuine danger and the mind playing tricks in unsettling environments. This was just an elevator, albeit a strangely well-maintained one. I stepped inside. Before I could turn to press the IW button, the doors closed behind me with alarming speed. The control panel illuminated, and the IW button depressed on its own. "What the—" I lunged for the door open button, but the elevator had already begun its descent. The sensation was unlike any elevator I'd experienced. The car moved with impossible smoothness, yet I felt we were descending far faster than any normal elevator should. The floor indicators blinked past. B1, B2, B3, continuing well beyond what should have been possible for the prison's foundation depth. I checked my phone. No signal, as expected. I opened the camera app and began documenting the elevator's interior, narrating quietly. Elevator appears to be descending below Blackwater's known levels. Construction inconsistent with 1960s prison architecture. No indication of how it's powered. I panned around the elegant interior. Car is immaculately maintained even though everything around it is decaying. The descent continued far longer than physically possible. B10, B11, B12. Each number represented depths that should have put us well below the water table, possibly into bedrock. Yet the elevator continued its smooth journey downward. A wave of claustrophobia hit me. I'd been in tight spaces during explorations before, but something about this situation, the sealed car, the impossible depth, and the sense of moving into unknown territory, triggered a primal panic I struggled to control. Still descending, I continued narrating, keeping my voice steady to calm myself. Approaching B-17 now. The elevator slowed, finally stopping at what the panel indicated was B-17. I checked my watch again. Incredibly, 40 minutes had passed since I'd entered the elevator. The descent had taken far longer than it should have, eating into my remaining exploration time. I had 5 minutes left before I needed to head back to meet the others. 5 minutes to glimpse the isolation wing and return to the elevator. The brass doors slid open. Before me stretched a corridor that shared nothing with the decaying prison above. The walls, floor, and ceiling were a pristine, almost luminous white. The hallway extended forward with clinical precision, illuminated by recessed lighting that cast no shadows. The air smelled sterile, with a subtle metallic undertone that caught in the back of my throat. This wasn't the isolation wing I'd expected. This wasn't part of Blackwater State Penitentiary at all. At least not the prison we'd been exploring. I stepped out of the elevator, turning to make sure I could get back in. As the doors closed behind me, they seamlessly blended into the white wall, leaving no trace of the entrance. I pressed my hands against the surface where the doors had been, finding nothing but smooth, cold material that resembled drywall but felt denser, almost artificial. The elevator was gone. My way back had vanished. I was alone in a pristine white corridor that shouldn't exist, somewhere far beneath Blackwater Prison, with no clear way to return to the others. The smooth white wall felt cold under my palm, unnaturally so. I pressed harder, searching for any crease or seam where the elevator doors had been just moments before. Nothing. The entrance had completely vanished, leaving an uninterrupted expanse of pristine white material. "You've got to be kidding me," I muttered, my voice sounding flat in the sterile air. I turned to face the corridor stretching before me. Unlike the crumbling decay of Blackwater above, this hallway looked brand new, or maybe timeless, like it didn't age at all. The floor gleamed under bright fluorescent lighting recessed into the ceiling. No dust, no signs of age or wear, just polished perfection extending farther than I could see. I pulled out my camera and started recording, narrating quietly as I documented my surroundings. I'm in some kind of corridor beneath Blackwater Prison. This doesn't match any of the blueprints we studied. The construction appears recent, though that should be impossible given the prison's abandonment 27 years ago. I reached out to touch the wall again, this time running my fingers along its surface. The material resembles drywall but feels denser, colder, almost like it's refrigerated. The air smelled sterile like hospitals with a metallic scent that made my throat feel strange. I tasted copper when I inhaled deeply. With no other options, I began walking forward, keeping close to the right wall. Urban exploration rule number 1. Always maintain contact with one wall in an unfamiliar space to avoid walking in circles. But something told me normal rules didn't apply here. The hallway extends hundreds of feet with no visible doors or windows, I continued narrating into my camera. No junction points or access panels. Nothing but white walls, white ceiling, white floor. My footsteps bounced back strangely, as if the sound returned a half-beat too late. I'd been in countless abandoned buildings, but never had I felt so completely isolated, so removed from the world above. After walking for about 10 minutes, I noticed something odd. The corridor appeared straight ahead, but looking back, I could only see about 50 feet behind me before the hallway curved gently out of sight. "That's not right," I said to myself. I stopped and turned completely around. I was certain I'd been walking in a straight line, yet the corridor behind me curved away as if I'd been following a gentle arc all along. I checked my compass. The needle spun lazily, unable to settle on a direction. My watch still worked, but showed that over 20 minutes had passed since I'd entered the corridor. Time seemed to be moving normally, at least according to my perception. I continued forward, increasingly aware of subtle spatial distortions. The hallway curved almost imperceptibly to the left, making it impossible to see very far ahead. yet I never felt like I was turning. My inner ear registered no change in direction. "The layout defies normal architecture," I spoke into the camera, trying to keep my voice steady. "It curves without feeling like it curves, like walking on a giant spiral that's so gradual you perceive it as straight." My thoughts turned to Sarah and the others. They'd be expecting me at the meeting point soon. What would they do when I didn't show up? Would they find the maintenance tunnels, the hidden door, this impossible elevator? The further I walked, the more the sterile environment began to affect me. The unchanging white walls provided no reference points, no way to measure progress. The constant buzz of the recessed lighting became a pressure against my eardrums. The metallic smell intensified until I could taste it with each breath. After what my watch claimed was 40 minutes of walking, I heard it. A sound that didn't come from me. A deep, labored breathing traveled through the corridor, bouncing off the walls in pulses that seemed to ripple through the air itself. I stopped dead, holding my own breath to listen. "Hello?" I called out, hope briefly flaring that I'd found another person. Maybe Sarah, Kyle, or Kevin had somehow found their way down here too. No response. Just that continued rhythmic breathing. Too deep, too wet-sounding to be human. It reminded me of the time I'd visited my grandfather in hospice, the ragged sound of lungs struggling to function. "Is anyone there?" I tried again, my voice smaller this time. The breathing continued unchanged. Something about its steady, mechanical quality sent a chill up my spine. Whatever made that sound wasn't responding to me. It might not even be aware of me. I moved forward more cautiously now, keeping my footfalls as silent as possible. The breathing grew louder with each step, coming from somewhere just beyond the curve ahead. My camera remained clutched in my hand, still recording. I raised it to eye level, using the display screen to look around the bend before physically committing to the turn. The screen showed only more white corridor, but the sound was definitely coming from just ahead. I took a deep breath and rounded the gentle curve. My body froze before my mind could process what I was seeing. Every instinct screamed to run, but shock rooted me to the spot. Blocking the entire corridor lay what I can only describe as a massive corpse-like entity, its bloated gray flesh pressed against the walls and ceiling, filling the space from floor to top. The creature appeared vaguely humanoid but horribly enlarged to impossible proportions. It had to be at least 15 feet tall, though it lay on its side, completely blocking the corridor. Its skin was translucent, similar to wax paper with light behind it. Dark fluids pulsed slowly through oversized veins visible beneath the surface. The rhythm matched the labored breathing that now surrounded me completely. The thing's face was mercifully turned away from me, pressed against the far wall. But even from behind, I could see occasional twitches ripple across its massive body, subtle movements that belied its corpse-like appearance. The sterile smell of the corridor was now overwhelmed by the sharp sting of chemical preservatives, formaldehyde perhaps, or something similar. My stomach heaved. I clapped a hand over my mouth, fighting waves of nausea as I backed away slowly. The camera slipped from my fingers, clattering on the floor. The sound bounced around the space, but the entity showed no reaction. I bent to retrieve the camera, never taking my eyes off the massive creature. It seemed deliberately positioned, blocking any further progress down the corridor. Through the rising panic, scientific curiosity briefly surfaced. What was this thing? How had it gotten here? Was it truly alive even though it looked like a corpse? The twitching suggested it was alive somehow, yet it remained motionless otherwise, each breath laborious and mechanical. I raised the camera again with trembling hands, documenting the nightmare before me. Looking through the viewfinder helped me stay calmer while facing the impossible thing filling the corridor. Encountered entity. I whispered into the microphone, my voice cracking. Humanoid but enlarged. Approximately 15 feet tall. Gray skin, translucent. Fluids visible beneath surface. Appears dead but breathing. A particularly violent twitch rippled across the entity's massive shoulder, and I stumbled backward, nearly dropping the camera again. That was enough. Whatever this place was, whatever that thing was, I needed to get out. I needed to find the others, to reach safety, and to return to the world that made sense. I turned and ran, no longer concerned with documenting or exploring. My only thought was escape, getting back to where the elevator had been. The curved corridor flew by as my feet pounded against the polished floor. The breathing faded behind me, but the memory of that massive body, that twitching gray flesh, stayed burned into my vision. What had Blackwater Prison been hiding? What kind of facility was this really? I ran until my lungs burned, until the stitch in my side forced me to slow to a walk. According to my watch, I'd been running for nearly 10 minutes. I should have reached the spot where the elevator disappeared, but the white corridor stretched endlessly ahead, curving gently out of sight just as before. This isn't possible, I gasped between breaths. I should be there by now. I leaned against the wall, trying to calm myself, trying to think logically. The spatial distortions I'd noticed earlier, was I running in circles? No, I'd maintained contact with the right wall the entire time. Urban exploration rule number 1. Unless the rules didn't apply here. Unless the space itself was wrong. I pushed off the wall and continued walking, fighting rising panic. I'd find the elevator. I had to. Sarah and the others would be worried by now, searching for me above. I needed to get back to them, to warn them about what lay beneath Blackwater. The corridor continued its gentle curve, with identical white walls offering no landmark, no reference point, and no way to know how far I'd come or how far I had yet to go. The entity's breathing had faded completely now, replaced by the sound of my own ragged gasps and the soft thud of my boots against the polished floor. But the memory remained vivid. That massive creature blocking the hallway, those visible fluids pulsing beneath translucent skin, the occasional twitches suggesting life where there should be none. I walked faster, desperate to find the elevator entrance that had disappeared. My watch showed I'd been in this underground section for over an hour now. Sarah would definitely be searching for me. The white corridor stretched before me, curving gently out of sight. I had no choice but to continue forward, hoping to find my way back, hoping to escape this sterile, impossible place and the horror it contained. I had to find that elevator, had to get back to Sarah and the others. I broke into a sprint, my boots slapping against the polished floor. According to my mental map, I should have reached the elevator entrance by now. But the corridor just kept going, curving gently in a way that prevented me from seeing more than 50 feet ahead or behind. 5 minutes of running became 10. 10 became 15. My lungs burned and a stitch stabbed at my side, but the elevator entrance was nowhere to be found. "This isn't possible," I gasped, slowing to a stop and doubling over with my hands on my knees. I straightened and stared at the corridor stretching behind me, identical white walls, floor and ceiling extending into the distance before curving out of sight. No sign of the elevator. No indication I'd made any progress at all. I pulled off my backpack and dug through it, searching for anything that might help. My hands closed around a small pry bar we used for opening stuck doors. I approached the nearest wall and wedged the metal edge against it, expecting the drywall-like surface to crack or dent. The pry bar slid off without leaving a mark. I tried again, putting my full weight behind it. Nothing, not even a scratch. "What the hell is this made of?" I muttered, running my fingers over the pristine surface. I grabbed my utility knife next, flicking open the blade and pressing it against the wall. The sharp edge should have sliced into the material, but it skated across the surface like I was trying to cut glass with a plastic spoon. I felt suddenly panicked. I pounded my fist against the wall, the impact sending shockwaves up my arm but leaving the surface unmarked. "Hello," I shouted, my voice bouncing back at me from all directions. "Is anyone there? Can anyone hear me?" Only my own voice bounced back at me, distorted and wrong, like the acoustics of the space weren't functioning normally. I checked my watch. 7:42 p.m. I'd entered the prison with the team at 1:30 p.m. 6 hours had passed. 6 hours. Sarah, Kyle, and Kevin would have realized I was missing hours ago. They'd be searching for me, maybe even contacted authorities even though they risked trespassing charges. I pulled out my phone, desperate for any connection to the world above. The screen displayed an impossible jumble of numbers and symbols where the time should be, and the signal indicator flickered between full bars and no service in a nauseating pattern. "What the hell?" I whispered, watching as the battery percentage cycled randomly between numbers. I shoved the phone back in my pocket and tried to focus. I needed to think logically, to approach this situation with the same methodical analysis I'd applied to countless other explorations. "Okay, Alex," I said aloud, needing to hear a human voice even if it was just my own. "You're in some kind of structure beneath Blackwater Prison. The spatial dimensions don't make sense. The elevator disappeared. There's a thing blocking the path forward." Saying it out loud made it sound insane, but it also helped organize my thoughts. The walls are impenetrable even though they look like standard construction materials. Time seems to be passing normally on my watch, but my phone is malfunctioning. Sarah and the others must be searching by now. I took a deep breath, trying to control my racing heart. I need to keep moving. Maybe there's another way out further along. I shouldered my backpack and began walking again, this time away from where I'd seen the entity. If the elevator entrance was truly gone, my only option was to look for an alternative exit. As I walked, I pulled out my pocket knife again. This time, instead of attacking the wall, I used it to scratch a small X into the surface. To my surprise, the knife left a visible mark. Not deep, but definitely there. "At least I can track where I've been," I murmured, feeling a small victory in this simple accomplishment. Every 20 paces, I marked another X on the wall, creating a trail I could follow. The corridor continued its gentle curve, never revealing more than a short distance ahead. The white surfaces began to strain my eyes, the lack of visual reference points creating a disorienting effect similar to snow blindness. After what my watch claimed was 30 minutes of walking, I paused to check my progress. I turned to look back at my trail of marks. They were gone. "No, that's not..." I rushed back to where the most recent X should have been. The wall was pristine, unmarked, as if I'd never touched it. I placed my hand flat against the surface, feeling the unnatural coldness seeping into my palm. My brain struggled to process what was happening. Had I imagined making the marks? No, I'd watched the knife cut into the material, had seen the scratches with my own eyes. I made a new mark, pressing the knife harder this time, carving a deeper X into the wall. I stood watching it for several minutes. Nothing happened. The mark remained clearly visible. I continued forward, marking the wall again and glancing back frequently. 5 minutes later, when I checked again, the new mark had also vanished. A chill ran through me that had nothing to do with the temperature. Whatever this place was, it seemed to be healing itself, erasing my attempts to impose human order on its surfaces. I had taken perhaps 10 more steps when I noticed the lighting changing. The recessed ceiling lights, which had maintained a constant sterile brightness since I'd arrived, began to pulse subtly, brightening and dimming in a rhythm that made my eyes water. At the same time, the temperature plummeted. Within seconds, my breath clouded in front of my face. I zipped my jacket to my chin, shivering as the cold penetrated my clothing. "What now?" I muttered, watching ice crystals form along the edges of the walls. The temperature had dropped at least 30 degrees in less than a minute. The pulsing lights intensified, creating patterns that sent sharp pains behind my eyes when I looked directly at them. I kept my eyes on the floor, following the corridor as it continued its gentle curve. Except the corridor ahead no longer curved. Where there had been only one path before, I now faced a junction. 3 identical hallways branched out from where I stood, each looking exactly like the one I'd been following. "This wasn't here before," I said, my voice sounding small in the frigid air. I was certain this intersection hadn't existed minutes ago. I turned to look behind me, half expecting to see my path had vanished as well. The corridor behind remained intact, curving gently out of sight, but my footprints in the thin layer of frost that now covered the floor showed I'd walked in a straight line to this junction. The layout was changing, rearranging itself as I moved through it. "Hello," I shouted again, louder this time, desperation edging my voice. "Sarah! Kyle! Can anyone hear me? I'm trapped down here." My shouts bounced down all 3 corridors, the sound distorting unnaturally before fading. I continued calling until my voice grew hoarse, hoping against hope that sound might travel through some ventilation system to the prison above. After several minutes of shouting with no response, I studied the 3 options before me. Each hallway appeared identical, the same white walls, the same pulsing lights, and the same light coating of frost. Nothing distinguished one from the others. I chose the leftmost corridor, keeping a hand pressed against the wall as I moved forward. The cold was becoming painful now, seeping through my clothes and numbing my fingers. The pulsing lights overhead had settled into a rhythm that made me nauseous if I looked up for too long. This new corridor twisted and turned unpredictably, sometimes narrowing until my shoulders nearly brushed both walls, sometimes widening into circular chambers with multiple exits. I chose paths instinctively, trying to maintain a general direction that I hoped would lead to an exit. After what felt like hours, but my watch claimed was only 45 minutes, I entered a space unlike any I'd encountered so far. The corridor opened into a rectangular room approximately 30 feet long and 20 feet wide. Unlike the sterile white hallways, this space contained furniture and equipment. Metal desks lined the walls, their surfaces covered with papers and antiquated office equipment. Typewriters, rotary phones, adding machines. Filing cabinets stood in neat rows along one wall. A large chalkboard dominated the far end of the room, covered with equations and diagrams I couldn't begin to understand. The entire setup resembled a research station from the 1960s, perfectly preserved. "What the hell is this place?" I whispered, moving cautiously into the room. Unlike the corridors, the temperature here was almost normal. The lights remained steady without the nauseating pulse. For the first time since entering the elevator, I felt like I'd found a space designed for human occupation. I approached the nearest desk, examining the papers scattered across its surface. Most were covered with dense technical text and diagrams, bearing government classification stamps and project codes. The letterhead on several documents read, "Department of Energy, Special Projects Division." One folder caught my eye, labeled Project Threshold, Phase 2 Results. I flipped it open, revealing a typed report dated June 17, 1963. "Classified, Top Secret, Umbra," read the header. The text below began, "Following successful containment of the boundary entity, Project Threshold has entered Phase 2 testing of dimensional folding capabilities. Initial results confirm our hypothesis that the breach has created a self-sustaining pocket dimension within the primary containment zone. Spatial properties within this zone do not conform to standard Euclidean geometry, making conventional mapping impossible. Test subjects, see Appendix C for inmate ID numbers, report extreme disorientation, time dilation effects, and progressive hallucinations after 4 hours of exposure. 3 subjects failed to return from the containment zone even though they followed retrieval protocols precisely. We believe the interior architecture is unstable and subject to reconfiguration without apparent pattern. Warning: reality contamination spreading beyond primary containment. Recommend immediate construction of secondary containment structure around affected areas. Current estimates suggest dimensional instability could extend to a radius of 0.5 miles within 50 years if left unchecked." My hands trembled as I set down the report. The implications were staggering. This wasn't just a prison facility. It was some kind of government research site where they'd been experimenting with, what, dimensional physics? Creating tears in reality? I moved to another desk, finding more documents. One contained architectural plans labeled Isolation Wing, Containment Structure. The blueprints showed a prison wing built around a central chamber with strange geometric patterns embedded in the foundation and walls. Notes in the margins referenced dimensional baffles and reality anchors. Another report described successful containment of boundary entity, but warned that the entity itself was merely the smallest portion of a much larger dimensional presence attempting to access our reality. I sat heavily in a desk chair, trying to process what I was reading. The prison's isolation wing hadn't been built to contain dangerous inmates. It had been constructed to contain a tear in reality, a breach into another dimension. And that massive corpse-like thing I'd encountered, it wasn't dead. It was in stasis, acting as a living plug in the dimensional breach. I suddenly understood my situation clearly. I wasn't just lost in some hidden underground facility. I was trapped in what the documents called a pocket dimension, a space that existed alongside our reality but followed different rules, a place where corridors could rearrange themselves, where time and space functioned differently, a place that might not have an exit back to our world. I gathered the most informative documents, stuffing them into my backpack. Whatever was happening here, I needed to understand it if I had any hope of escaping. The reports mentioned retrieval protocols for test subjects. If inmates had been sent in and retrieved, there must be a way out. As I stood to continue exploring, the lights flickered and dimmed. The room's temperature dropped suddenly, frost blooming across the desks and papers in delicate patterns. The walls seemed to flex slightly, as if the room itself were breathing. I backed toward the door I'd entered through, only to find it had vanished. Where there had been an opening now stood a solid white wall. 3 new corridors had appeared along the other walls, none of which had existed when I entered. The realization hit me with nauseating clarity. The isolation wing wasn't merely containing something from another dimension. In some fundamental way, it had become that other dimension, a space with its own rules, its own physics, its own reality, and I was trapped inside it. I chose the middle corridor and started walking. I had to find a way out, had to get back to Sarah and the others, had to escape this impossible place before I became another test subject who failed to return. My watch claimed 4 hours had passed since finding the research station. That couldn't be right. The battery had been new when we started this exploration, but I'd been in this underground labyrinth so long the digits now flickered erratically. Sarah must be out of her mind with worry, I muttered, my voice raspy from shouting and the increasingly dry air. The floor beneath my boots had changed. No longer the polished surface I'd first encountered. It now gave slightly under my weight like memory foam. Each footstep left an impression that slowly filled back in after I moved on. I tested it with my hand, pressing down to watch the material yield and then recover, like living tissue. I pulled my hand back sharply. The thought was too disturbing to dwell on. The corridor widened into another room, different from the research station I'd found earlier. Metal observation chairs bolted to the floor faced a large glass window. Behind the glass lay a small chamber with restraints built into a central chair. Electrodes and monitoring equipment hung from the ceiling on retractable arms. "A testing chamber," I whispered, approaching the glass. The control panel below the window contained dozens of dials and switches, all labeled with technical jargon that meant nothing to me. One large button was encased in red plastic with the words, "Emergency Breach Protocol," printed beneath it. A notebook lay open beside the panel. I scanned the last entry, dated March 12, 1996. Subject 17 exposed to direct contact with boundary entity today. Initial readings showed rapid neural pattern degradation, followed by what appears to be synchronization with non-Euclidean frequencies. Subject began speaking in multiple voices simultaneously before losing consciousness. Upon revival, subject demonstrated ability to predict spatial changes 3-5 minutes before occurrence. Testing terminated when subject's blood began moving against gravity up walls of chamber. Termination protocol enacted. Recommend no further direct contact experiments. I set down the notebook with trembling hands. The clinical language couldn't disguise the horror of what had happened here. Moving to a filing cabinet in the corner, I pulled open a drawer labeled Photographic Documentation. Inside were hundreds of photographs chronicling the evolution of the facility and its impossible occupant. The earliest photos from 1961 showed scientists in lab coats standing proudly around what looked like a particle accelerator. Later images captured the moment it all went wrong. There was a swirling distortion in the center of their test chamber, and the first emergence of what they called the boundary entity. I studied these photos carefully. The entity I'd seen blocking the corridor was massively larger than what had first come through. In these early photos, it was roughly human-sized, but with each subsequent image, it grew larger, as if more of it was continuously pushing into our dimension. The final photos showed the construction of the isolation wing, the prison built around the breach to disguise what lay beneath. Inmates were brought in, some as test subjects, others as genuine prisoners to maintain the facade. I pocketed several photographs as evidence, though a voice in the back of my mind questioned whether I'd ever be able to show them to anyone. The ceiling above me suddenly dropped several feet, forcing me to crouch. The change happened in an instant, as if the room had suddenly compressed itself. I scrambled toward the exit as the walls began to pulse more visibly now, the white surface rippling like the flanks of a breathing animal. The corridor outside had completely changed. What had been a straight passage was now a twisting, organic tunnel. The ceiling height varied randomly, sometimes so low I had to crawl, other times soaring to heights that vanished into darkness above. "Still not the strangest thing I've seen today," I muttered, trying to calm myself with gallows humor. I pushed forward, my muscles aching with exhaustion. According to my malfunctioning watch, I'd been in this place for nearly 10 hours now. My water bottle was almost empty, and I was very hungry. The corridor opened into another room, this one clearly a researcher's private office. Papers were scattered across the floor as if someone had left in a hurry. A cot in the corner suggested they'd been living here. A journal lay open on the desk. The handwriting started neat and academic but deteriorated into frantic scrawls by the final pages. Day 47 underground. The breach is expanding faster than our containment measures. Harrison went to check the sensors in Section C and never returned. When we sent a search team, they found only his shoes, perfectly placed as if he'd been lifted straight out of them. The entity continues to grow. It's functioning as we hoped, a living plug in the dimensional tear. But at what cost? It feeds on the spatial distortion, getting larger as it consumes more of whatever lies on the other side. Day 62. I no longer trust my own perceptions. The hallways move when I'm not looking directly at them. I've started marking my path with chalk, but the marks disappear. Richards claims he's been having conversations with himself from tomorrow. Chen hasn't slept in 5 days because she says something is waiting for her in her dreams. Day 70. The prison construction above is complete. The department is bringing in actual prisoners to maintain the cover story. God help them. They don't know what's beneath their feet. Day 83. I found my way back to the normal world today, but only for a few minutes. I stepped through a door that wasn't there before and found myself in the prison kitchen. I ran for the exit but turned a corner and somehow ended up back in my office. This place doesn't want to let us go. Day 96. The decision has been made. We're sealing the isolation wing. Those of us still down here will attempt final egress through the maintenance tunnels. If we don't make it, may God forgive what we've done here. I set the journal down, feeling a sudden chill of realization. The researchers themselves had become trapped in the pocket dimension they created. Some of them never escaped. Was that my fate too? I collapsed against the wall, physically and mentally exhausted. My watch now claimed I'd been here for 18 hours, though I had no way to verify if that was accurate. Time itself seemed to flow differently here. The walls around me pulsated visibly now, no longer seeming like normal architecture. The floor had become spongier, yielding like moss beneath my weight. The ceiling constantly moved, with patterns that hurt my eyes if I stared too long. I closed my eyes, trying to rest, but visions immediately filled my mind, not dreams, but something more vivid. I saw Sarah, Kyle, and Kevin searching the prison above, calling my name as they combed through the maintenance tunnels. I could see their worried faces, feel Sarah's growing panic as hours passed without finding me. When I opened my eyes, the vision stayed for a moment, overlaid on the pulsing room around me. More images followed, researchers in lab coats running through corridors as walls moved behind them, sealing off their escape routes. Inmates strapped to chairs, screaming as they saw something beyond human understanding. They're not hallucinations, I realized aloud. They're memories. This place preserves moments in time. I forced myself to my feet, determined to keep moving even though I was exhausted. There had to be a way out. The researchers mentioned attempting final egress through the maintenance tunnels. That was how I'd gotten in. Maybe it was still my way out. I stumbled forward, following the organic corridor as it twisted unpredictably. The documents I'd found had mentioned reality anchors. Perhaps there were points where this pocket dimension still connected to the normal world. After what felt like hours of searching, I found myself in a massive circular chamber I hadn't seen before. The walls curved upward to form a dome, and in the center stood a complex machine that looked like the particle accelerator from the earliest photographs, though now it was partially melted and overgrown with something that looked disturbingly like flesh. This was where it had all started, the point of the original breach. As I approached the machine, the air felt thick and hard to breathe. Visions came faster now, overlapping like multiple exposure photographs. I saw the moment the breach occurred, scientists shouting as reality itself tore open before them. I saw the first tendrils of the entity pushing through from somewhere beyond, and the desperate measures they took to contain it. And I understood. The massive entity I'd encountered wasn't a monster. It was a barrier. A living plug pulled partially through from another dimension, trapped between worlds to seal the breach. The isolation wing hadn't been built to contain dangerous inmates. It had been built to contain a tier in reality itself. The corpse-like appearance, the mechanical breathing. The entity was in stasis, neither fully alive nor dead, existing in a state of suspended animation while preventing something worse from entering our world. I approached the ruined machine, hoping to find some control mechanism or emergency protocol, but it was decades beyond repair. The researchers had abandoned this place in the 1990s when they realized they couldn't control what they'd created. My eyes spotted a small red notebook wedged beneath the machine. I pulled it free and opened it to find a single page of handwritten instructions. Emergency Retrieval Protocol. 1. Locate null point, area where spatial distortion reads at 0.5 on hand scanner. 2. Remain at null point for 30+ minutes without moving. Recite retrieval code. Threshold Omega return 313. 4. If protocol fails, relocate and attempt again. Multiple null points exist but change location approximately every 12 hours. I felt a surge of hope. This was it, the way out. But I had no hand scanner to locate these null points. I would have to search blindly, testing locations through trial and error. I stuffed the notebook into my backpack and turned to leave the chamber, only to find myself face to face with the entity again. While I'd been examining the machine, the room had changed. The massive body now blocked my path, its gray flesh pulsing with each labored breath. But something was different this time. As I backed away, the entity's massive head slowly turned toward me. Where I expected to see a face, There was only a smooth gray surface with 5 vertical slits that opened simultaneously, revealing a glowing interior that hurt my eyes. A sound emerged from those slits, not breathing this time, but words spoken in multiple overlapping voices. Seeker, lost, like others. I froze, unable to comprehend that this thing was speaking to me. You remind of first ones. The researchers? I managed to ask, my voice barely a whisper. Breach? Makers? Yes, they brought me here. Anchor between worlds. The entity's words confirmed what I'd pieced together from the documents. It was an anchor, a living barrier preventing something worse from crossing over. Is there a way out? I asked, desperate for any guidance. No. Exit. Only. Transition. Space. Folds. Back. On. Itself. But the researchers, some of them escaped, I insisted. Illusion. Of. Escape. They. Walk. Different. Layer. Same. Prison. A cold realization hit me. What if there was no escape? What if this pocket dimension was completely sealed off from our reality now? The entity's massive body moved, the corridor behind it becoming visible as it moved aside. Go. Seek. Null. Point. Before. Too. Late. I didn't need to be told twice. I squeezed past the entity, careful not to touch its pulsating flesh, and ran down the corridor it had revealed. Hours blended together as I searched frantically for any area that might be a null point. I tried staying motionless in dozens of locations, reciting the retrieval code over and over. But nothing happened. Either I wasn't finding the null points, or the protocol no longer worked. My watch now claimed I'd been in this place for 18 hours. My water was gone. Hunger and exhaustion were taking their toll. Each time I blinked, visions filled my mind, moments from the past, glimpses of other places, other times. I collapsed against a corridor wall, no longer able to continue. The environment had completely changed since I'd entered. Nothing remained of the sterile white halls. Everything pulsed and seemed alive like tissue. The floors had become completely spongy. The ceiling heights varied randomly from claustrophobically low to dizzyingly high. As my consciousness faded, one final vision came to me, the clearest of all. I saw the prison above, saw the massive steel door to the isolation wing that wouldn't open under my hand. I understood now why it had been locked from the inside. It wasn't to keep people out. It was because inside, no longer connected to our reality in any meaningful way. The isolation wing existed in its own pocket of folded space-time, a self-contained bubble of warped physics where corridors could continuously rearrange themselves, where time stretched and compressed unpredictably, and where nothing led back to the world I knew. I closed my eyes, too exhausted to keep them open. In my final moments of consciousness, I thought of Sarah, her smile, her voice, her warmth. I hoped she would understand someday what had happened to me. I hoped she wouldn't risk coming to find me, because there was no finding someone lost in a place that existed outside normal reality. As darkness claimed me, I heard the entity's multi-layered voice once more. Rest. Now. Seeker. You are home.